Welcome back to the deep dive. So if you manage an enterprise network or, if you're a security professional, heck, even if you just work for a company with more than, say, 10 employees, then you rely on Active Directory.
Oh, absolutely.
AD is the core identity management tool for most organizations. It's the digital king of the castle, the gatekeepers. And because of that, it's just this constant, massive target for attackers. It's not a new target, though.
It absolutely is not. I mean, AD has been the bullseye for decades. It's always been that single point of leverage an attacker needs to move laterally through a network. But if you look at the sources we've pulled together today, the story isn't about what they're attacking. It's about the terrifying how. The whole calculus of risk has fundamentally changed.
Exactly. Our mission today is to cut through all the noise and show you very clearly exactly how generative AI hasn't just tweaked the edges of these identity attacks. It has fundamentally and dramatically accelerated the speed and the effectiveness of them. We are talking about a true paradigm shift here.
It really is.
What used to be a specialized, computationally expensive attack is now, well, it's cheap, it's fast, and it's accessible to pretty much anyone with $5 and an internet connection.
That's the key shift right there. You just said it. The barrier to entry for effective password cracking for these highly targeted credential attacks, it's now just significantly lower. What used to require, serious technical expertise, deep knowledge of cracking tools, immense computational overhead, that's now being outsourced to these incredibly sophisticated algorithms that are running on rented, powerful hardware. So for every defensive professional listening, this deep dive is a necessary and perhaps a bit of an uncomfortable reality check.
Okay, so let's unpack this and really establish the gravity of the threat we're discussing. We're dealing with an almost existential risk here, and the data backs that up. This makes it a crucial area for you to focus on. The motivation for this deep dive is really a single crucial statistic that drives the entire industry, and it's that stolen credentials are not some minor peripheral issue.
Not at all.
According to Verizon's data breach investigation report, compromised credentials are involved in a staggering 44.7% of all breaches.
Almost half. Just think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Nearly every other breach you read about involves an attacker simply walking through the front door using a valid username and password. And that's the crucial risk area that AI is now magnifying exponentially.
So if credential theft is the single most effective way into a corporate network,
And AI makes that theft 10 times easier, 10 times faster, and far more targeted.
then every organization managing Active Directory has a severe, immediate problem that their current policies probably cannot handle.
Exactly. We really need to understand the intelligence behind this new threat.
So let's jump straight into Section 1, the new generation of AI-powered password defense. We need to set up the difference between the before the era most corporate policies were designed for and the now. Before AI, attackers largely relied on, two pretty primitive methods. You had dictionary attacks, which checked against a static list of known bad passwords, or you had brute force randomness, which just threw every possible combination at the problem, often wasting computational cycles. It was sort of like throwing darts in the dark, hoping to hit the bullseye eventually.
That's a good analogy. Traditional attacks were really resource-intensive, and they followed these predictable, rigid patterns. You had your big static list of common words from previous breaches, maybe a few billion entries, and then you'd apply these simple, predefined, rule-based mutations.
What do you mean by rule-based mutation?
For instance, the rule might say, always add 1 to the end of every dictionary word, or swap the letter A for an @ symbol, but the entire process was still rooted in static data, the dictionary list or the fixed rule set, the defense.
Yeah.
They basically knew the offense's playbook,
But the AI era completely changes that playbook.
completely rips it up.
Instead of a static dictionary, we are now looking at sophisticated tools like PassGAN. Tell us about the underlying mechanism of PassGAN, because this is the future of password cracking, and it is actively being deployed right now.
Okay, so PassGAN represents a new generation of offensive tool built on deep learning. The name itself is pretty descriptive. It uses a generative adversarial network, or GAN. What's fascinating here is that it doesn't rely on a word list created by humans or rules written by an attacker. It learns autonomously. It engages in what's called adversarial training, a constant, automated cat-and-mouse game.
Okay, for the learner who might not be familiar with adversarial training, how does that make the tool so much smarter than a traditional rule-based cracker?
Think of it like this. You have two competing AIs. The first is the generator. Its job is to create passwords. It starts by looking at these massive databases of real leaked passwords from billions of users, the foundational breach data, and it tries to learn the grammar of human password creation.
The grammar, like sentence structure, but for passwords.
Exactly. Then you have the second AI, the discriminator. Its job is to act like a human security analyst. It receives passwords, some are real from the training data, and some are generated by the generator, and it tries to tell which ones are fake.
Ah, so the generator keeps refining its output until the discriminator can no longer tell the difference between a real, human-chosen password and an AI-generated guess. It's essentially a perpetual motion machine for improving the realism of its guesses.
Precisely. The cycle creates an algorithm that learns the intrinsic patterns, the subtle psychological quirks, and, the common human errors embedded in password creation. It learns how people actually choose their passwords, especially under the constraints of those complexity rules. And with every single iteration, its prediction ability improves, making its guesses incredibly potent.
So it's pattern recognition at a massive scale.
On a massive scale, yeah. It's moving far beyond the old idea of just random guessing or dictionary checking. This tool understands human cognitive shortcuts.
That's sobering, because if it understands human shortcuts, it eliminates vast swaths of computation that a traditional brute forcer would have wasted.
That's the efficiency game.
And the research validates this. We have specific data points that really highlight PassGAN's effectiveness, and they are genuinely shocking. What did the research find regarding its initial speed against common credentials?
Well, the research revealed two critical benchmarks that should alarm every single security professional listening. When they tested it against a common pool of previously leaked passwords, the kind of credentials that, AD environments are still riddled with, PassGAN demonstrated brutal efficiency. First, PassGAN was able to crack a staggering 51% of those common passwords in under 1 minute.
Under 60 seconds. Let that sink in. If you think about an organization with thousands of employees, and nearly half of the weak passwords can be generated and tested in less time than it takes to boot up a machine,
Right.
the window for defense is almost non-existent.
One.
The attacker simply needs a target hash in minimal time.
Exactly. And that speed is achieved because it's not randomly guessing. It's generating these high probability candidates almost instantly based on learned human behavior. But even more worrying, if you give it a little more time, say a month of constant computation.
This is the 81% statistic.
Within a month, that number jumps to 81% of common passwords cracked. This is no longer some niche academic exercise. This is a highly optimized, efficient guessing machine that focuses computational power exactly where it needs to be. It focuses on the candidates that mirror human behavior. It tells us that relying on any password that adheres to a common, predictable structure is now effectively a temporary measure with an expiry date of about 30 days.
Wait, I'd challenge that point a bit. If the model is trained on generic breach data, passwords from Netflix, from forum accounts, streaming services, how does that translate into being hyper-effective against a specific corporate Active Directory environment, which might have its own unique set of standards?
That's where it gets really interesting. This is what we call targeted training and contextual guessing. The AI isn't just relying on generic global data sets, it's becoming customized. If an attacker knows they want to breach your organization, they start doing highly targeted reconnaissance, and then they feed the resulting data directly into the AI model's training loop.
So how does the AI get so smart? Specifically about my organization, how does it incorporate context?
This is the truly malicious evolution that LLMs enable. The models are trained on contextual data, making them surgically targeted. If an attacker wants to breach, let's say, Company X, they feed the AI-specific data. They might use organization-specific breach data from prior smaller incidents. They scrape publicly available social media content related to the target. They analyze job descriptions, and they ingest content scraped from publicly available company websites, press releases, and even employee LinkedIn profiles.
So the AI essentially acts as a hyper-efficient digital detective that does all its homework on the target, and it distills all that corporate jargon and trends.
Precisely. Let's build a quick scenario. Let's say Company X just successfully implemented a major internal initiative to update its entire IT infrastructure, which they internally nicknamed Project Pegasus. And let's say everyone on LinkedIn and in press releases is talking about the new Q4 integration set for winter 2026.
Okay.
The AI sees this, the internal jargon, the timing, the corporate enthusiasm, and it starts generating guesses that incorporate Pegasus, Q4, or winter 2026, combined with common human patterns like adding a 1 or a 1.
Wow. The implication here is enormous. A generic word list would never have Pegasus Winter 2026.
Okay.
But the targeted AI model recognizes that internal jargon's a prime source for human password construction because it lowers the cognitive load for the employee.
Exactly.
An employee who has to remember dozens of credentials will naturally gravitate towards something highly relevant and timely.
And this is exactly what the AI exploits. It's a huge leap from generic brute force. It turns the password attack into a hyper-personalized psychological guessing game. It makes them so much more dangerous and resource efficient than just relying on random permutations. The attacker isn't wasting time guessing random words. They are guessing words that are actively floating in the target organization's consciousness and combining them with the predictable patterns learned from billions of other compromised passwords.
That leads us perfectly into Section 2, acceleration and lowering the barrier to entry. It's not just that the guesses are smarter, it's that the entire process from figuring out the pattern to the actual execution has been put on fast forward. The speed comes from intelligent guessing, not just raw computation alone.
Right. And we need to dive into the difference between simple rule-based mutation and what we're now calling intelligent credential mutation, because this is where the speed advantage really manifests and differentiates the new attacks from the old ones.
Right. Traditional attacks, as we said, used simple, predefined rules that were applied indiscriminately.
It's totally right.
They might have a rule that says, take the base word, swap A for @ swap O for 0, and add. So if the password was house, the cracker would test Hugh's use, regardless of any context.
Intelligent mutation, however, is dynamic and it's context-aware. Let's imagine a user at Company X used a password summer 2024 for their personal streaming service, and that credential was found in a third-party breach. When the attacker attempts to breach the corporate AD, the generative AI doesn't waste time on random mutations like summer 2024 @ or summer 2024 #123.
Instead, it looks at that established pattern and instantly generates highly likely variations specific to the target environment, recognizing the human pattern of password rotation.
Correct. The AI recognizes the seasonal pattern and the year increment, which is a classic predictable human behavior when users are forced to change their password every 90 days. So if the known password is summer 2024, the AI immediately tests high-probability corporate variations that align with the forced change cycle, like fall 2024, winter 2025, and spring 2025. Or perhaps it'll incorporate that Pegasus project code name we talked about and test Pegasus 2024.
That's terrifyingly efficient. So the AI doesn't need to try 1 million rigid, predefined variations.
No.
It only needs to try the handful of most probable variations based on observed human rotational patterns. That just drastically reduces the computational load and increases the success rate.
Exactly. The key takeaway for the learner here is that the AI focuses computation on the most probable candidates based on observed human patterns. It's a resource optimization strategy for the attacker. I mean, why try millions of unlikely strings when you can try dozens of highly probable ones, especially when you know humans hate creating entirely new passwords from scratch?
Right. And this acceleration isn't limited to just cracking the hash. It starts way back at the initial planning stages, the reconnaissance and the phishing. How have large language models, LLMs, accelerated those early phases of the attack, making the whole operation smoother and faster?
Well, LLMs have dramatically reduced the time investment in gathering context and creating convincing lures. What used to take human analysts hours, even days, of meticulous open-source intelligence gathering.
Scrolling through news, social media, internal documents.
That now happens almost instantly. The LLM acts as an automated, highly sophisticated research assistant that can synthesize context for these highly targeted campaigns.
Can you elaborate on the kind of synthesis an LLM can perform? It's more than just copying and pasting from a press release, right?
Oh, far more. A human attacker might spot a single relevant detail. An LLM analyzes everything. Press releases announcing Q1 results, organizational charts published on official websites, LinkedIn profiles of key employees discussing recent achievements, product names, project code names mentioned in conference speeches. The LLM takes all that disparate data and instantly incorporates that context into two key attack methods:
Which are?
targeted password spray attacks and highly sophisticated personalized phishing campaigns.
Okay, so the password spray first.
For the password spray, if the LLM feeds the attack tool a highly probable context-aware password like Pegasus Winter 2026, that spray attack suddenly becomes exponentially more effective than trying, welcome 123. It's not a generic attack. It's a specific surgical guess.
And then there's the phishing angle. If the LLM is good at generating human-sounding text, it can bypass standard filters and human skepticism very quickly.
Absolutely. The LLM can generate these highly believable, well-written emails that reference current company events, internal jargon, or even the recipient's specific role. That makes the social engineering component so much harder for employees to spot. Imagine an email to an IT manager, perfectly formatted, referencing the Project Pegasus deployment schedule and asking for an urgent credential confirmation related to winter 2026 compliance.
That's sophisticated, fast, and driven entirely by automated AI analysis.
Yep.
Okay, so the attacks are getting smarter, and the whole process is accelerating due to the intelligence of the models. But let's shift focus to the raw computational power required, because that's the second part of the equation. Speed via affordable hardware. This is an unintended consequence of the broader AI boom, the hardware availability. Why has the massive expansion of legitimate AI research made life easier and cheaper for attackers?
This is a really fascinating intersection of economics and crime. The legitimate AI boom, all the companies training deep learning and LLMs, has created a massive, sustained demand for powerful consumer-grade hardware, specifically high-end GPUs. This demand has spurred incredible innovation in production, and crucially, organizations that train these models often rent GPU clusters during peak times. This is normalized and made incredibly accessible, the rental of this powerful hardware at commodity prices.
So if legitimate AI companies are renting out these GPU farms for heavy computation, attackers can simply piggyback onto that infrastructure during downtime. Or they can leverage the newly affordable consumer market for high-end cards that are exponentially more powerful than older security hardware.
That's precisely the dynamic, and it severely reduces the upfront investment required for a criminal operation. The economics are just staggering. Our source details that an attacker can now rent a cluster of 8 high-end consumer GPUs, something like the RTX 5090s, for approximately $5 per hour.
$5 an hour for that level of processing power.
Mm-hmm.
That's dirt cheap for an attacker who might be looking at a potential 6- or 7-figure payout from a successful breach. Help us understand the true computational risk here. What does this hardware boost mean practically when combined with the intelligent guessing of PassGAN?
To understand the impact, you need to understand hashing. Active Directory often uses protocols that rely on standard hashing functions like NTLM, or, for more resilient systems, often uses bcrypt or similar functions. Cryptographers design these hashes to be computationally expensive. They introduce a deliberate delay, a slowdown, to make brute force cracking take longer.
It's like a built-in speed bump.
It is, yeah. But when you introduce vastly superior hardware, that design slowdown shrinks dramatically.
So those cheap, powerful GPUs essentially nullify the time delay function built into the cryptographic process.
Exactly. The source notes that these latest generation cards crack bcrypt hashes roughly 65% faster than previous generation cards.
65% faster.
So if a crack operation previously took a full week on older hardware, the attacker can now achieve that same result in just 2 or 3 days. For a small organization's AD hash dump, what might have been an infeasible 3-month crack job is now a viable weekend operation.
Wow, 65% faster for minimal investment. This combination cheap, powerful hardware, the brute force engine, merged with AI models that generate highly effective, targeted guesses, the intelligence. It just means the time required to crack weak to moderate passwords decreases dramatically.
It does. Attackers can test far more high-probability candidates in a shorter time frame than was ever feasible just a few years ago. It's a perfect storm of accessibility and efficiency.
It fundamentally shifts the risk profile.
It does. The time you thought you had to force a password change, say, the time between a breach being reported and your organization applying a patch, has shrunk from weeks down to days, sometimes hours, if the weak password is a highly probable guess.
So what does this all mean for defense?
Yeah.
If the speed and intelligence of the offense have increased so dramatically, it means the traditional defense mechanisms that we've relied on in Active Directory are simply not equipped to handle this threat. Which brings us to Section 3, why traditional Active Directory defenses crumble.
And this is a harsh reality check that organizations need to internalize. Most AD password policies were designed for a pre-AI threat landscape. They were compliance-focused, designed to check boxes against dictionary attacks, but they are catastrophically fragile against intelligent pattern recognition attacks.
Okay, let's start with the most common policy, the standard complexity rules. The ones that mandate an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a number, and a symbol. We all grew up hearing that this was the definitive best practice. Why has this policy become a liability against generative AI?
It's the paradox of constraint. Standard complexity requirements produce predictable patterns that AI models are specifically designed to recognize and exploit. When you force a human user to meet those four criteria in a short 8 or 10 character string, they will inevitably default to the easiest, most logical, common human patterns. The rules enforce standardization.
So the defense mechanism that was intended to provide friction actually standardized the input, making it easier for the model to predict the next iteration.
Exactly. The quintessential example, which we touched on earlier, is password 123. It meets all the complexity rules, uppercase P, lowercase letters, number 123, symbol at the end, but it follows a formula that generative models recognize instantly. They know humans use common base words, they know they substitute 133 or 001, and they often place the required symbol at the end. The complexity rule didn't create security, it created standardization, which is a massive gift to the AI.
But help me understand the psychology of that. Why don't users just choose a truly random 10-character complex string? Is it just laziness or something deeper?
Oh, it's cognitive load, a well-documented human factor. Humans have to manage dozens of credentials, and when a system imposes these arbitrary, complex constraints on a short string, the brain defaults to minimizing effort. It uses memorizable templates and rules. The capitalization is always at the start, the symbol is always at the end. The AI exploits the psychological truth that constrained randomness is not randomness at all, it's just a set of highly probable templates.
Next, let's talk about the mandatory rotation requirements. The old 90-day change rule. I remember when security auditors would flag you immediately if you didn't enforce that.
Yeah.
Why is it failing so spectacularly against AI?
Mandatory rotation fails because it leverages the same core human weakness: predictability under constraint. When users are forced to change passwords frequently, say every 90 days, they don't invent a new random 18-character passphrase. They default to predictable, minimal effort variations.
So instead of creating something new, they create something adjacent to the old one.
Precisely. They use incrementing numbers, they move to the next season, or they make minor variations of the previous password. If their password was fall 2024, the next one will almost certainly be winter 2024 or fall 2025. These are human shortcuts designed to defeat the memory burden of frequent changes, and these shortcuts are highly recognizable patterns.
And the AI models, trained on breach data, where these predictable rotations are just rampant, instantly recognize and exploit these rotational patterns.
They absolutely do. They use the known password as a seed, recognize the rotational pattern, and then instantly test the next 5 most probable iterations during a credential stuffing attack. So for the attacker, the 90-day change rule doesn't increase security. It acts as a very convenient, automated way to estimate the next password iteration. The old policy becomes an expiry date for the password, not a defense against breach.
Okay, finally, let's address the perceived silver bullet. Multi-factor authentication, or MFA.
Ah, yes.
We are constantly told MFA solves all these problems. Our source clarifies that basic MFA helps, but it certainly doesn't eliminate the risk. I mean, if the attacker has the password, isn't the whole point of MFA that they still can't get in?
Look, MFA is essential. It is a foundational security control, and no organization should operate without it. But we have to be realistic about its limitations in the face of sophisticated attacks. Basic MFA doesn't eliminate the risk of the compromised password itself. The fundamental vulnerability, the knowledge of the primary credential still exists.
So even if the user has MFA enabled, the attacker still knows the primary credential, which is half the battle. How do modern attacks bypass that second factor to make that knowledge useful?
They use non-cracking methods that exploit human behavior or technical flaws. We see this constantly. Take social engineering, session hijacking, or the increasingly prevalent MFA fatigue attacks.
Let's define MFA fatigue attacks for the listener, because that sounds like a very modern and maybe AI-enabled attack vector.
It is. MFA fatigue is essentially a denial-of-service attack aimed at the user's resolve. The attacker has the compromised password, so they initiate login attempts repeatedly, often late at night, say 3 a.m.
Oh, that's evil.
Each attempt triggers a push notification on the user's phone, spamming them with requests to approve the login. The goal is simple: overwhelm the user until, in a moment of frustration or sleepiness, they simply hit accept just to stop the buzzing and let them go back to sleep.
That's horrifying and disturbingly effective, because the human desire to just stop an annoyance overrules security awareness.
Precisely. And once the attacker bypasses that single MFA prompt, the door is wide open because the primary credential has already been verified as valid and is known. We must also consider session hijacking, where the attacker steals the valid, authenticated token after the user logs in, or reverse proxy phishing, where the attacker sets up a fake site that intercepts and forwards the MFA details in real time. The core takeaway is this. The moment the MFA prompt or session is defeated, the knowledge of that vulnerable password becomes the key to the castle. We need to assume the password will be known and defend against that knowledge.
That is the core philosophical shift required. We must stop relying on obscurity thinking the password won't be guessed and start relying on resilience. Which brings us to Section 4, implementing real defenses against AI-amplified attacks.
So, if complexity rules fail and rotation policies create predictability, what is the critical shift organizations need to make in their password policies immediately?
The source material is very clear on this. Organizations must move beyond basic compliance checkboxes to policies that address how passwords are actually compromised by modern AI tools. The critical shift is prioritizing length over complexity.
And this is the biggest change in defensive philosophy. Why does length fundamentally stump the AI models where complexity failed? We talked about the constraint paradox. A short, complex password is easy for the AI to model because the complexity rules constrain the possible character placement and substitution, creating a predictable pattern. But an extremely long string breaks that predictability because the length exponentially increases the key space the AI has to explore.
Key space being the total number of possible combinations.
Correct. The number of possible 8-character passwords, even complex ones, is computationally manageable for the new GPUs. But when you move to an 18-character password, the key space increases to a degree that even clusters of those $5 an hour RTX 5090s simply take too long to crack. The computational time required to test every single possibility goes from days to decades.
So we should forget rules like P at or dollars and start focusing on passphrases.
Absolutely. The source highlights this contrast perfectly. An 18-character passphrase built from 4 or 5 truly random words like correct horse battery staple, but maybe slightly more obscure, presents a vastly greater obstacle to AI models than an 8-character string loaded with special characters. The random words introduce semantic complexity and huge length, which the AI models, even with contextual training, find much harder to predict unless those words are globally common.
Well, that makes perfect sense. We are using length to reintroduce a combinatorial difficulty that even the fastest GPUs find computationally infeasible. But I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If we enforce an 18-character passphrase, aren't we just driving people to write it down on a sticky note under their monitor? Is the cure worse than the disease?
That is the essential usability challenge, and it's why this shift must be accompanied by changes in infrastructure. The move to length-based passphrases necessitates the adoption of enterprise-grade password managers. If the policy mandates complexity that is impossible for a human to remember, say, 20 random characters, the risk of writing it down skyrockets. But if you mandate a policy that promotes a long, unique passphrase stored safely in a central manager, you achieve security without sacrificing usability. Organizations have to make the password manager the default, easy path for the employee.
That leads us to the ultimate defense, which so many organizations overlook: the visibility imperative. If an AI is trained on breached credentials, no amount of hashing or complexity matters if the plaintext password is already known.
This is the brutal truth of the modern security landscape. We spend so much time worrying about the quality of the hash function bicrypt, Argon2, and so on, and the speed of cracking. But if the password was already stolen in plaintext from a third-party breach 2 years ago, the attacker simply skips the cracking process entirely. They just use the known plaintext password in a credential stuffing attack against your AD.
So the most important defense is knowing whether your employees are using passwords that have already been compromised in external breaches. If the plaintext password is in an attacker's training dataset, the attacker simply uses the known password to attempt a credential stuffing attack against your AD. It's a race against the attacker's knowledge base.
And that race is constant. So what does implementing this visibility look like in practice? It means you need continuous protection against known compromised credentials, updated constantly in real time.
And we are talking about a massive scale here, right?
Massive scale. The sources highlight the ability to continuously protect the organization against over 4 billion known unique compromised passwords. That's 4 billion unique data points, usernames, and passwords that an organization must constantly check against its internal environment.
So it's a real-time global threat feed integrated directly into your Active Directory controls.
Yes, and this protection needs to be updated daily based on real-world attack monitoring. This blocks credentials even if they otherwise meet your outdated complexity requirements. The fact is, a complex 10-character password is useless if it's one of those 4 billion known credentials that malware has already stolen globally and is currently being used to train the next generation of PassGAN models.
That is an absolutely essential defensive layer. It protects against the ultimate risk, the attacker having prior knowledge. Beyond blocking globally compromised passwords, we also need to return to the idea of custom dictionaries, but applied proactively against the AI's reconnaissance efforts we discussed earlier.
Right. Remember how the AI uses LLMs to analyze press releases and product names to generate those Project Pegasus guesses? We need to defeat that targeted approach by blocking organization-specific terms. Custom dictionaries that block company names, product names, common internal jargon, department names, even common local sports team names. All that stuff is absolutely essential to frustrate the AI's targeting capabilities.
So, for the learner, this means going beyond the standard list of dictionary words and proactively reviewing internal communication channels for popular project names or departmental slang that needs to be preemptively blocked.
Exactly. It requires a proactive review of corporate culture and language. If the AI figures out that everyone at the company knows the name Project Phoenix or Q1 rollout, the custom dictionary blocks that term from being used in any password. It forces users away from those predictable contextual patterns, which is the generative AI's primary strength.
When you look at the strategy comprehensively, these measures stack up against the different stages of the AI attack.
They do. The strategy is multi-layered. Enforce length and randomness to defeat the computational speed, block globally compromised passwords to defeat credential stuffing and known plaintext knowledge, and use custom dictionaries to defeat targeted AI reconnaissance and smart guessing.
And the beauty of that approach is that these measures, when combined with proper pass-free support and length requirements, enforce true randomness and make it exponentially harder for the AI models to generate effective, successful guesses within a viable time frame.
That comprehensive approach is the only way to effectively counter the acceleration provided by AI tools. But before any organization can implement these sophisticated controls, they need to know where they stand today. You can't budget for a solution until you understand the scale of your current vulnerability.
That brings us to the final specific step, assessing current exposure. You can't fix what you don't measure.
Absolutely. The necessary first step is auditing the current Active Directory environment. Organizations must understand exactly where AI-powered attacks are most likely to succeed right now. I mean, are your users currently using passwords that are already known in that 4 billion dataset? Are they using those easy 8-character patterns?
And this audit needs to be non-intrusive. If you're handling sensitive AD infrastructure, you can't afford to run tools that might destabilize the environment or require massive infrastructure changes just to check the passwords.
Correct. The sources mention the availability of tools that provide a free, read-only AD span. These tools interface with your AD without requiring any changes or writes to the environment. They identify weak passwords, already compromised credentials, and policy gaps without risking the integrity of your production domain. It's a critical, low-risk starting point.
So it's essentially a vulnerability assessment tailored specifically to identity security, showing you which accounts are using those 81% of common passwords that PassGAN could crack within a month. That data gives you the urgency and the justification you need to push for change.
Yes. It provides the crucial hard data needed to justify the shift away from outdated compliance policies, which were designed for 1990s threats, toward the length, randomness, and visibility controls required to survive the new era of AI-amplified identity attacks. You can walk into a budget meeting and say, "We have identified 500 accounts whose passwords could be cracked in less than a week with commercially available AI tools." That changes the conversation immediately.
Okay, let's bring this all back together for the learner. We've established the threat is smarter, cheaper, and faster.
Let's do a final synthesis. The core lesson we've taken from the source material is this. Generative AI has irrevocably changed the balance of effort in password attacks. It has given attackers a measurable and massive advantage. The time required to crack passwords has plummeted, not just because hardware is faster, but because the smart models like PassGAN generate highly effective targeted guesses using organizational context gleaned instantly by LLMs.
And the required response is a fundamental strategic pivot. Organizations have to move away from the outdated notion that complexity rules offer real security. We must focus intensely on length, enforcing real randomness through passphrases, and maintaining constant visibility into global breach data so that known compromised passwords are never allowed in the environment.
Right.
This is how we defeat both the intelligence and the speed of the AI offensive. It's about making the attack computationally infeasible again.
The good news is that the defenses are known and available. The bad news is that organizational inertia is the greatest enemy. Updating 80 policies requires effort, user education, and often an initial investment in new tools. But the alternative, a successful AI-driven credential compromise, is exponentially more costly.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, in your own organization or your own understanding of cybersecurity? We'll leave you with this provocative thought.
The question for every organization today is no longer if they should strengthen their Active Directory defenses. The question is whether they will do it before their current weak credentials show up in the next massive breach dataset. A dataset that will be immediately used to train the next, even more efficient generation of AI attacker models. The race is on, the efficiency gap is widening, and the clock is ticking faster than ever.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Stay vigilant, and thanks for listening.